So what this is the Fish and Game's population management plan. We do the same thing for all of our big game animals. We call them species management plans. We do the same thing for moose, sheep, and goat. And tonight we have a mule deer plan, which is the same thing, you know, for different species. Basically how biologists are proposing to manage wolves over the long term, or excuse me, mule deer. And we're proposing, this is a 5-year proposal through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Also imposes upon the state a 5-year post-delisting monitoring effort. Whenever they delist any species, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service requires a minimum of 5 years to make sure that the animal that was recently delisted is still strong and viable, and that all of the state plans that are in place are adequate and things are working. So that's what this is a 5-year plan, and we'll get into that. Draft plan development has taken about a year to develop. We had a biological team with regional staff, all the regions in the state participate with the development of the plan. We had a stakeholder group. The stakeholder group had 7 members, 2 environmental groups, the Defenders of Wildlife, Idaho Conservation League. We had 2 hunting groups, SFW of Idaho and ISCAC, the Sportsman's Caucus Alliance for the state of Idaho. We had 2 industry groups. We had wool growers, and we had Cattlemen's Association, and we also had the Idaho Outfitters and Guides Association representatives. So there were 7 stakeholders, and we met 3 times as a stakeholder group and several times as a biological group. The biologists and the stakeholders met a few times, and we hammered out this proposed plan, basically, that outlines what we think might be a good way to begin management of wolves upon delisting. We also conducted a public survey. We sent out 1,000 letters to livestock producers, 1,000 letters to a random selection of Idaho license holders, hunting license holders, Idaho hunters, and 1,000 letters to a random sample of Idaho citizens. The random sample was purchased from a company that provided, we asked for people with a telephone, a landline, and people with a permanent resident address so that we could send them a letter and follow up with the phone. Well, we didn't realize this until after the survey had already been sent out. When you purchase that sort of a list, you expect everything to work right. But nowadays, not everybody owns a landline. A lot of people have cell phones, and that's their only telephone. So that reduced that sample. And also there's a lot of transient people without permanent addresses. And usually when you send a letter, you address it to the head of household. And so we believe that the head of household responded more regularly to our requests than other members. So with that, we had probably a biased sample of Idaho residents. So we did the best we could to divide that out, and in our to look at the subsamples within that population to try to get information. And we're going to follow up with some other telephone surveys to see what level of bias actually exists. But I'm just saying that because we did have a few problems and didn't want to hide anything that part of the survey was a little troublesome. But the rest of the survey, the livestock producers and the hunters, was very solid, we felt. And, but that's on our website, and it's also, we have some of those surveys available. And then, of course, the Wildlife Bureau and the Communications Bureau and other headquarters staff helped out. So the plan goals are basically outlined within the state legislative plan that was passed on to us and approved by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We have these buffers, these boundaries, within which we are required to work as a fish and game agency to make our state plan match the legislative plan. And the legislative plan basically requires us to manage for a self-sustaining, viable population. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service requires the same thing. Manage wolves as a native resident wildlife species for the state of Idaho. Manage wolves to minimize conflicts. That's a very important part of the species plan that we're working on here that I'll talk about today, is these two maintain greater than 15 breeding pairs and manage to minimize conflicts. The state plan says that wolves will be allowed to persist where there's no conflict, and the bottom is the 15 breeding pairs. So that's the flexibility that we have in numbers. And for those of you that may not be familiar with some of the terminology, breeding pairs is different than a pack. All breeding pairs are packs, but not all packs are breeding pairs. Breeding pair is a very specific definition for a breeding pair. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service requires us to prove a breeding pair is a minimum, well, a minimum of two adult wolves that produce 2 pups that survive to the end of the year, to December 31st. So that's a very high level of monitoring required to do that. So breeding pairs then has a higher bar than just a pack. We can go out and verify that several wolves are traveling together and are territorial, but it takes another step to monitor pup production and survival. And that's what our biologists spend most of their summer doing, in addition to trapping and collaring wolves. In order to monitor these packs, we try to put 1 to 2 radio collars in each of the packs. And today, I think we've got about 120 radio collars in what Michael, 60 packs, and out of 82 packs in the state. So about 75% of our packs that we have verified are radio collar, and that helps us tremendously. But as you might imagine, once we start hunting wolves, it's going to be a lot harder to keep radio collars on them. So we're looking at alternative ways of monitoring. Then we have to assure interchange with adjacent populations in other states. They have to be all connected. That's part of our requirements. To establish a strong and balanced public education program. Whoops, I was going backwards. Okay, another important thing, the governor of Idaho has taken a lot of flack recently over the last year or so from all over the country and the world over something that he said on the steps of the State House in the first few days in office. But as part of this plan, the governor felt it appropriate to sign a letter that states the actual intent of the state through the delisting process and management of wolves for the long term. Can everybody see that, or should I read it? Everybody see it? The important thing here is, one of the statements is, the reality is that wolves are here to stay, and that you're going to leave it up to the Fish and Game Department to figure out how best to do that. If possible, I'd like to be able to hold questions to the end of the session. Okay, so wolves are pretty well distributed throughout the state. This is a 2006 map. I don't know how clear that is. But if they're primarily well distributed within all of the national forest lands in north and central Idaho. The range expansion that's occurring over the last few years continues to move southerly and more of the private lands, this country down in here, and over in southeast in this country, and to the west, up out of Weiser and Council Country, and then in the Panhandle. Most of the interior Idaho is fairly well saturated with wolves, and we're tending to find fewer new pack development in the middle, although it's still happening. Most of the population expansion seems to be occurring on the periphery.